Tonight's story is about sand in evening light. Not a storm, not a caravan, only dunes, dry air, and the long desert quiet that arrives when the heat begins to leave the ground. The Sahara is often imagined as vast emptiness, but emptiness is not quite the right word. A dune field is full of shape. Slopes, ridges, curving crests that catch the low sun on one side and hold blue shadow on the other. The whole landscape seems made of repetition softened by distance. One dune, then another beyond it, fading into a horizon of pale gold and rose. This is where the story begins, with shape, with dry grains, with still air broad enough to carry a low sound when the right slope begins to move. Some dunes can sing, not in the human way, not in melody, but in a low booming or humming voice that emerges when very dry sand slips together down a steep face. Grain against grain, a moving sheet of sand, a whole slope releasing itself in one soft descent and producing a tone deep enough to seem older than the moment that created it. That tone is what makes the dunes famous, but tonight the tone does not need to be startling. It can remain soft, it can remain part of the desert's own voice. Imagine one dune at dusk. Its crest is sharp in the last angled light, the slip face below is smoother and darker, the sand is dry enough to flow if disturbed, but for now it waits. The air is cooling, the sky is still bright above the west, but already a little deeper blue has begun to gather overhead. The whole desert seems to be listening to itself. Now the sand begins to move. Not all at once, only a sheet of grains loosening and descending together, and with that sliding a low sound arises, a hum, a drone, a tone that seems too large for something as simple as sand. This is the wonder of singing dunes. The material is ordinary, but the conditions align so delicately that the dune becomes an instrument. Dry grains of the right size, a steep slope, enough movement for many grains to travel together. The sound is not added to the landscape from elsewhere, it belongs to the landscape itself. Sand, slope, sound, again. Sand, slope, sound, again. Dry grain, low tone, dusk air. Scientists who study booming dunes point to the role of grain properties and the synchronized motion of sand in avalanching layers. The sound can be low and resonant, almost like a far drum softened by distance, but at bedtime explanation can remain close to image. The dune hums because many grains move together in dry desert stillness. The larger understanding is enough. What matters most is how well the sound fits the place. The desert already favors long, simple things. Long shadows, long ridges, long silences. So when a dune produces one sustained tone, it feels less like interruption and more like the desert speaking briefly in its own scale. Imagine now a whole field of dunes under late light. Crests in rows, warm upper faces, blue hollows between them. The sound from one slope would not feel crowded there. It would feel perfectly placed, one low line of sound across a broad, quiet geography. That spaciousness is what makes the subject so calm. Nothing is cluttered, nothing asks for urgency. Even the sound does not break the stillness, it deepens it. A low tone across dry air can make the surrounding silence feel larger, not smaller. The desert already holds more quiet than most landscapes, and the humming dune gives that quiet a shape the ear can follow for a moment before it returns to silence. Silence before, silence after, one soft booming note between them. Again, silence before, silence after, sand carrying a voice between the two. Now imagine the night approaching further. The heat has lifted, the sand cools, the light leaves the dune faces one by one until the whole field is built more from shadow than from gold. At that hour the memory of a humming slope feels almost impossible and yet entirely natural, like the memory of a warm stone after sunset. The Sahara becomes even more restful then. No roads in view, no settlement, only forms of sand and the open sky above them. The dunes keep their shapes whether they sing or not. The sound is only a passing revelation of what the landscape can do under the right conditions. Most of the time the dunes remain silent, which somehow makes the moments of humming gentler rather than louder. The desert does not perform constantly, it waits. Waiting is part of the beauty. The dune waits on its own slope, the grains wait in dryness, the air waits in evening stillness. Then for a moment the whole system aligns and the land seems to breathe out a low note. That is enough. No need to chase the sound. No need to make it a riddle. It is a geographical fact softened by desert scale, a dry slope that sometimes becomes a voice. This can now reduce itself to almost nothing. Dune crest, sliding grains, one low humming tone and the long receptive silence around it. The more the image returns, the sleepier it becomes. One slope in fading light, one release of dry sand, one note across the desert, again, one slope, one note, one vast evening holding both. And so tonight the Sahara remains in the calmest version of its own whispering wonder, ridge after ridge of dry gold sand, air cooling into blue, grains slipping together down one face of a dune and a low tone rising from them, brief, resonant and gentle enough to fade back into desert stillness without ever disturbing the peace it came from. There is another reason the dunes feel so sleepy. They are shaped by repetition at every scale. Grain after grain gathers into slopes, slopes gather into ridges, ridges gather into fields, and the fields themselves repeat toward the horizon until the desert seems built from one long patient idea. When a dune gives off its low hum, that sound belongs to a place already organized around repeating forms. Repeating form, repeating silence, repeating tone only sometimes. This lets the mind rest in the subject without effort. Nothing needs a sharp explanation once the eye has accepted the geometry. One slope is enough, one crest is enough, one low note is enough. The rest of the desert keeps widening around it until the humming seems almost like a brief shadow cast by sound across sand. Imagine now the coolness after full sunset. The dunes are gray, the sky has gone from blue to indigo, the stars have begun to appear above the ridge lines. At that hour, even the memory of booming sand feels gentler. The desert has grown so large and quiet that the sound becomes a small thing again, a low vibration carried briefly through still air and then absorbed back into the night. That absorption is the final comfort. The dune does not keep singing, the desert does not keep speaking. Everything returns to silence. Again, dry grain, low note, silence after. Again, wide dune face, cool air, the whole Sahara settling into dark. This may be the softest version of the story, not a spectacular desert, only a sleeping one. A desert in which even the rare sound is shaped by material patience and then given back to stillness. The humming dune becomes almost a bedtime bell rung once and left to fade across open space. And so the sand can continue into the night with no need for anything more. Crest after crest, cool air above, dry grains resting until they move again, and a voice hidden inside the slope, waiting quietly for the next soft descent. The dunes are built from repetition at every scale. Grain after grain, ridge after ridge, one slope loosens, one low tone rises, and then the larger silence returns. The sound never overwhelms the desert, it only briefly reveals the voice already hidden in the shape of dry sand. Imagine the ridges under full night. Gray crests, dark hollows, one broad sleeping field of cooled desert. If a note comes then, it comes softly enough to feel like part of the night itself. That is enough for one more return. Ridge, grain, low tone, wide silence. A slope of grains can hum like a low instrument. The desert becomes an example of scale turning softness into resonance. Softness into resonance, grain into tone. Again, softness into resonance, grain into tone. One of the most peaceful parts of the phenomenon is that the sound is not constant. A place that hummed at one time of day may be perfectly silent at another. The dune is therefore never reduced to a machine. It remains a landscape first, a shape of sand under weather and time. The humming is simply one of the ways that shape sometimes expresses itself when slope, grain, dryness, and motion align. This keeps the topic from ever becoming technical in a cold way. The science is there, but the shape remains primary. The sound belongs to the shape belongs to the desert belongs to stillness. Now imagine climbing down one side of a dune after sunset. Each step sends a small slip of sand away from your foot. Most of these slips are too small to do anything but whisper. Yet they remind the body that the whole dune is made of possible movement. A larger release could happen somewhere on a steeper face. And with it the low note. Until then, the sand keeps only the promise of sound within itself. That promise is restful. It does not have to be fulfilled. The dune may remain quiet all night and still feel full of hidden life. The Sahara is full of such hidden life in landscape form. Heat stored in stone until dusk, wind stored in shape until morning, sound stored in slope until grains begin to move. The singing dune fits this pattern perfectly. It is less an exception than another example of the desert keeping more inside itself than first appears. The more often the image returns, the simpler and deeper it becomes. Cool ridge, dry slope, one low note if the grains decide to move, and otherwise only vast dark sand under stars. That final image can hold the whole subject without strain. No need for explanation now, no need for voice even. Only the long dune faces sleeping in the night and the quiet knowledge that under the right conditions one of them may hum again before dawn.